A little bit of perspective, by that time in 2023, it was the largest AI M&A deal ever, even bigger than DeepMind that got acquired by Google.
It was actually a small team, extraordinarily focused, that managed to build a vaccine that saved millions of lives, and even probably dozens of millions of lives in record time, making history in so many ways. And by the way, the most successful biopharmaceutical product in history at that time. So that was crazy inspiring. If you look at Africa as a continent, it is by far the continent that has the biggest renewable energy potential. This is important because ultimately AI will scale, and it will be a game of who can deliver the most compute at the most effective price with the cleanest energy. And I think we can be extraordinarily competitive.
Hello, Internet, and welcome to episode 12 of the RallyCap podcast. My name is Kian, and I'm a general partner at RallyCap. Today's guest is Karim Beguir, who's the founder and CEO of InstaDeep, an AI company that started in Africa, expanded into Europe, then exited to BioNTech for $700 million. Karim has been advocating for the transformative role of AI in Africa for over a decade. In his recently published book called Leapfrog, he offers a roadmap for harnessing AI, clean energy, and digital money in Africa, showcasing how Africa-born tech leaders can combine on-the-ground insights with global know-how to enable scalable, homegrown transformation. I'm truly honored that he chose this podcast to share InstaDeep's story. And without further ado, let's get into the conversation. Karim, thank you for doing this.
It's a pleasure, Ken.
Such a pleasure
to be here.
For whoever was living under a rock, you're the founder of InstaDeep. You've been building it for 10 years. 2 years ago, you got an acquisition from BioNTech, the German biotech giant, for around $700 million. A little bit of perspective, by that time in 2023, it was the largest AI M&A deal ever, even bigger than DeepMind that got acquired by Google. Maybe
Right.
people don't realize that now because all the AI boom happenings, but during that time, it was the largest AI M&A deal ever in the world.
Absolutely. And today is still the largest AI deal outside the US. Yeah,
Insane. And also the largest African acquisition as well.
correct.
A lot of people know the headlines. InstaDeep works with AI, works with different clients and help them build AI applications or solve problems. But I'm curious about specific use cases. So you've worked on pandemic modeling, on protein folding, and on logistics. Do you mind if you go in details in each one of them? And if you can break down how complex is the problem and how complex is the solution as well. Let's start with protein folding.
Absolutely. And just to say a few words, I mean, a good way to understand what InstaDeep does is we're a deep mind for the enterprise, meaning we have capabilities to innovate, to use deep tech, and we deploy these in concrete applications. For example, protein folding, this was actually a work popularized with models like AlphaFold and others, which was quite remarkable. And us at InstaDeep, we looked at how we could actually deploy these on specific problems. So if you look at like the protein folding problem, for those who are not very familiar with it, it's an insanely hard problem. If you know the sequence of a protein, which amino acids come after which one, etc., it's still extremely hard to figure out how does this assemble in 3D. And biology, it's all about interactions between proteins in 3 dimensions. And so this ability to understand that was a big breakthrough, popularized initially by DeepMind, actually. But the general breakthrough was applied to many types of proteins. And if you look in practice, when you look at specific problems, for example, in immunology, you want to understand how the immune system is going to recognize potential antigens and the like, you have like subclasses of that problem that are insanely hard. And so one of the things we did at InstaDeep is we published research about how to improve AlphaFold for a certain type of problems, and notably in immunology. So having, for example, what we call PMHC-TCR interactions. So you have the immune system that is looking for antigens, potentially dangerous proteins, every cell in the body actually expresses proteins at its surface. And so that interaction between potentially TCRs and those peptides that are expressed on top of cells, well, that's a complex interaction. It's called the PMHC-TCR interaction. And we published research that allowed to have better understanding of what is going to be binding or not, for example. So it's like taking a general breakthrough like AlphaFold, but making it useful in practice on sub-problems.
So you take this data and then you run your AI algorithm to be able to come up with the most accurate model for it. How does that work?
Yes, so you have a bit of ground like base data, which is your ground truth. And what we do in this particular case is we do lots of simulations, the molecular dynamic simulations, to see what are the interactions. We really simulate those, and we use those simulations to actually teach evolved version of AlphaFold, like deep learning style, what is going to bind or not. So in a sense, you are investing compute power to go beyond AlphaFold and then refine AlphaFold on this type of things. And one of the things we did also was to entirely rebuild AlphaFold at the time when it was not available as a model. We had actually rebuilt with the team the entire model and trained it ourselves. So it's really having this ability to use deep learning in concrete use cases, and in this case, learn from simulation. And perhaps a word on learning from simulation. This is an extremely important paradigm now. We've been through, with large language models, through the phase where you're learning essentially at the scale of the entire internet, except this is now done. And the next breakthrough or the next frontier is, can you generate relevant data in simulation and teach the models to learn from that? And that's what happens in many of the recent breakthroughs of AI. And this is something we're very familiar at InstaDeep. So can you generate training data through simulation at a high throughput using supercomputers and then train a deep learning model to do that? But that's exactly what we did in this case.
And this particular protein folding problem, was that an academic endeavor and then you published papers to push science through, or was there an actual client who would pay you? How is this commercially viable?
It's a very good question. When we started InstaDeep, I had this passion for research. AI as an industry was extremely open. You could get everything that's going on at Facebook, at Google, etc. It was extraordinarily open. These were the years like 2015, 2016, big boom in the deep learning revolution. When we had our first paper, I was thinking like, oh, should we patent this or not? Should we be open book about it or not? And I decided, you know what? Let's share it to the world. And they turned out to be a great strategy to find clients. So in a funny way, being good karma about publishing research ended up giving us clients. Since then, we created really this open research culture. We publish a lot at InstaDeep. If you look since the beginning of the company, we've published more than 100 research papers. Recently, we've had 6 papers that made it to Nature journals, which is considered state of the art. Very recently, we had one paper, ChatNT, that made the cover of Nature Machine Intelligence, an achievement I'm very proud of because I actually participated in that paper. And so really like we publish and we innovate a lot. It's a very competitive industry, but by innovating, actually this is something that differentiates us from competition. And we have many companies that come to us and say, hey, we really like your research on this and that. Could you help us deploy it or maybe make a variation of it for this specific problem? And this worked in biology, but also outside biology. This is actually how we got in touch with Deutsche Bahn, the National Railway Company of Germany. Our first paper, actually, they read it and they said, hey guys, this is super cool what you're doing about combinatorial optimization and solving complex scheduling problems.
Yeah, you basically redefine the railway system in Germany. How does that work?
This was actually the first paper of InstaDeep. I was attending NeurIPS. So NeurIPS is the biggest machine learning conference in the world. And on that particular year, this was 2017, I was actually there in the US watching presentations live. And that's where David Silver, very famous researcher in like reinforcement learning, comes and shows to the world AlphaZero. And AlphaZero, this is amazing model where essentially you could learn chess or you could learn the game of Go from zero data, entirely in simulation through the system playing against itself. And so I'm watching this and I'm thinking, actually, there is a way to take this and change the algorithm and apply it to what we call combinatorial optimization problems. And so what are combinatorial optimization problems is any situation where you have a very large amount of solutions possible. Think about how you schedule trains or a fleet of cars, or how you pack many items in a container.
Or play AlphaGo, right?
Or play AlphaGo,
Yeah.
exactly. While at AlphaGo, you're playing against someone. In the combinatorial optimization problem, you're really playing against yourself, trying to maximize a score, essentially. And so there was a clever variation we came up with, the team and I, about how we would take those insights and deploy them to improve combinatorial optimization. So that was our ranked rewards paper, our first paper, which was a bet. Should we publish or not? I said, you know what, let's be open source. And it was incredible how much that paper positioned InstaDeep, which was at the time a very small but super active startup out of Tunisia, barely started in Europe with the London office. Really, that put us on the map of elite AI researchers. There was an absolutely insane moment. And it opened the path to like projects like Deutsche Bahn and other, which are variations of that.
So Deutsche Bahn comes to you. What do they want? And how much are they willing to pay to solve this problem? And how hard is the problem?
So the problem is insanely hard. If you look at scheduling trains, you need to have the physics of every train. You need to have the topology of the network, the security distances. You want that train to be at that time in that city, or like at least to have certain amount of traffic that passes to meet demand, etc. And so if you look at all the constraints, like it's insanely big, and there are many potential variations of what you could do. And so in practice, people have been actually building those timetables essentially manually, or at best using like regional optimization. Maybe you would improve a bit things locally, but optimizing it at the entirety of the network, this is pretty big. We're talking about like 30,000 kilometers of railway. Germany has a very dense railway network, one of the densest in the world. Something in the order of like 10 to 20,000 train rides a day, insanely complex problem. And so we tackled it with this approach of learning from simulation. Essentially, like you're teaching the AI how to play that game, and you have a score, and your goal is to maximize the score. The game is very complex, but through time, the AI system figures out what to do. And this is something where we developed a lot of expertise. And that's why Deutsche Bahn reached out to us. And they were like, we believe actually your technology is interesting. Please apply to all the tender offers that we will do, because we think you'd be competitive. And we did, and we were very surprised. We were in competition with 30 international firms, big names, etc. And we won. That was our first €1 million+ deal. This was 2019. That was a magic moment. Just to give you a sense, like when we started InstaDeep, 5,000 dinars of capital. The first year we made something in the order of like $7,000 of revenue. Me and Zora would take zero salary for years. We started really rock bottom and built it progressively. And so 2019, hitting our first like €1 million+ contract, that was quite a moment. I was like, you know what? Actually, we can do something. And this was super, super exciting.
Insane. So third problem, the pandemic modeling. Can you explain what was going on and how important was your solution? I think it was the breakthrough that led to the acquisition, right?
It was one of these important moments indeed with our relationship with BioNTech. When the pandemic hit, we were working with BioNTech, but more on personalized cancer vaccines and things that were not pandemic related. And then pandemic arrives, big shock to the world. And at that time, the culture of InstaDeep, and it's actually our mission, is to build the AI that benefits everyone. That's literally our mission statement. And during the pandemic, I was thinking about like how we could be helpful into this global emergency. And the moment came when, if you remember, there were lots and lots of variants emerging. This was like the winter, November, December 2020. And you had like literally dozens of thousands of sequence variants every week. And there is no biology expert, no human expert that can take all this data and figure out what needs further testing, what could be potentially more dangerous than the typical variant. And so I was like, this is actually a perfect problem for AI.
Just to understand, there are all these variants, but then nobody has enough resources and time to go and research every single variant and find a vaccine. So they have to prioritize, but they don't know which one to focus on. You run your model and say, hey, look at this one and go spend time on this one. Is that correct?
Yes. And the idea is lab capacity for testing is precious. You cannot test many sequences. And so you have to choose. And the problem is the choice, right? And to give a context to the audience, 2020 was the year when GPT-3 came out. In June, there was this very important paper from OpenAI about GPT-3. At the time, OpenAI was still publishing. And that paper really showed the power of language models. This was well before ChatGPT. The word GenAI did not exist yet at the time, but I was actually fascinated by that paper. And the biggest breakthrough was this notion that in the context window, you put a few examples and the system would either answer you zero shot or just a few shots. You show a few examples and the system will understand natural language and give you what you want. And learning literally one token after another, how to predict the next token. And at the time I was like, this is super cool. Has it been used in biology? Not really. And so we started playing with large language models in biology. We were among the first in the world. And so this explosion of variant that came later that year, we were like very well positioned to tackle that problem. And so we were actually, I believe, the first in the world to train large language models, essentially GenAI tech, on the COVID-19 variants like SARS-CoV-2. We were like, everybody in biology is still using older generation models, LSTMs and the like. We're going to actually use transformer, attention-based models, the hot stuff coming from NLP, like the English language modeling. So this was novel and it worked. So we used a system to train on literally every sequence we could find on SARS-CoV-2 and then build a system that would anticipate and predict how immune escaping a particular variant is. And so incredibly, it worked. We validated the results with our colleagues at BioNTech, and there was a correlation of roughly 85% between what you could predict with the AI and what you would get from the lab. So that was a big breakthrough. We published the results, and that was also a moment indeed where the BioNTech team realized actually AI is super useful, not only in theory about what you could do, but like really in practice in an emergency. And that was a moment I was extremely proud of because this was not something that was asked from us. This literally came from the creativity and the innovation spirit of the InstaDeep team.
At some point, I asked about you from one of our common connections, and he said, "Oh, Karim is busy finding a cure for cancer." I didn't really know if he was joking or not, but he seemed serious. So, is there a cure for cancer that is possible eventually through the breakthrough AI tech? And are we going to see it within this decade?
I think so. Absolutely. I mean, for RNA technology, the COVID vaccine was a breakthrough. It was the first time RNA-style vaccines were actually deployed at large scale, saved millions of lives, and essentially validated the technology. Colleagues at BioNTech had been working on that technology for a long time, and that moment came during the pandemic where literally they changed the world for the better. But that also showed the potential of that technology as a sort of system to stimulate the immune system. And they had been working on this for a long time. Cancer is an extremely difficult problem. So what's the difference with SARS-CoV-2 and COVID pandemic is in the COVID pandemic, you had a vaccine that was essentially the same for the entire planet. Cancer instead is something that affects you personally. Every cancer is unique. It's mutations that only impact you. And so as a consequence, you need to design a personalized vaccine, mRNA-based, which is exactly just for you, for literally a sample size of one. And so that's harder, but technically it's possible. And right now, the BioNTech team has multiple clinical trials working on this. And to answer your question, yes, I think that in the next decade, we're going to see extraordinary progress on that space, which is actually a great application of AI because AI is all about pattern matching, and matching patterns of mutations to design next generation vaccine is an extremely good use case of AI.
But I assume that since you said it's so personalized that it only applies to my specific body, it's commercially not viable to spend that much resources to solve for one person unless you're a billionaire and you're willing to pay anything to get that vaccine. The challenge is to make it accessible and it has to be cheap enough. So the compute of it has to be cheap enough to be affordable.
And actually that's exactly the beauty of having an mRNA platform, because an mRNA platform essentially is like you have a vehicle and you're changing the information that is carried by that vehicle. So the same platform can actually apply to many patients. Every time you're just changing the messages, if you want, like the code for that particular patient. But as a consequence, is technically not extraordinarily more expensive. It's not like you have to reinvent the wheel completely. And that's actually exactly why mRNA is so powerful. It's a generic way to build vaccines, and then you're just adapting the message for everybody's circumstances. And this way, it will still be something that's going to be expensive in the beginning, but it has really the potential to scale very quickly to many patients. And that's the hope.
Fascinating. Given all the use cases that you've worked on at InstaDeep and the different client base, one might assume that you're an AI consulting shop that has different clients that works on different projects. So how were you able to convince investors that this is actually a VC play and VC backable company? And also the scale of the exit, the $700 million is a VC scale exit. How do you marry the idea of a consulting company and an actual VC business?
I think what's unusual about us is the innovation. Like consulting companies are more like companies that take everything that exists and then just deliver it for this particular client or that one. Us at InstaDeep, we are a genuine deep tech. We build new algorithms. We make progress that never happened before. And so from that angle, we are much more important to our partners than just people who come and deliver service. So that's the first point. It's the innovation capability. Like building a dream team like we did at InstaDeep is something very difficult to do. We managed to do it, and I'm very proud to say this is a team which is between Europe, the US, and Africa, which is the only case of its kind in deep tech. So something that people thought was impossible. So that's one component. And the other component is that we also build scalable products. I give you one concrete example, dpcb.ai, which is you could literally go online and start routing printed circuit boards or placing components. This is a full scalable product. We have thousands of paying users on it. So what I'm saying here is InstaDeep is like this very rare company that can build the future, whether it's scalable product or decisive solutions for a particular client, but living in the future and hence being extraordinarily valuable in accelerating partners.
Let's get back to the start. You have all these ambitions, all these dreams. You're passionate about the research part of AI. How do you even secure your first client? Who pays you to do this kind of research and applications for them?
It started really as a fun side project. I didn't have crazy ambitions day one. I had met Zora and we had worked on a semi-charity project in Tatooine in the south, and this was really like to help the youth have like sports facilities and ultimately learn how to code and stuff. And I did not have this crazy ambition day one that InstaDeep would be what it turned out to be. It was more like Zora was a great co-founder. I had a good vibe about doing tech and entrepreneurship in Tunisia. I strongly felt that Tunisian and by extension African talent was undervalued, underappreciated, and that we could innovate. So I was like, oh, you know what? Let's go for it and see how it goes. So in the early days, we were more like a general tech company, much more like service oriented and stuff. And then roughly a year into the project, I actually read a paper about deep learning, like the new rebranding of AI using neural networks, etc. And I realized, actually, I know this stuff. And like I had studied applied mathematics at École Polytechnique in France, and then at the Current Institute of Mathematical Sciences in the US, which was one of the best in applied math. This is where Yann Lequin teaches in New York, for example. And so I'm like, I know these things. And indeed, I had trained neural networks back in the early 2000s. And that's when it hit me. We could do this. We could become an AI company. And actually being technically competent on this, on top of being a founder and having my co-founder was technical, but more on the software, UI, UX, web, that was a great combo to do something in AI. And so this is important. Like it started with feeling good about the team, feeling good about my co-founder. And this is more important than the idea or the business plan and all this. These things can come much later and can evolve. What cannot evolve is the team. So if you had to choose, do you start with a great team and a bad idea, or a great idea and an okay team? Definitely take a great team, because you can always change the idea.
And then drawing parallels with some of the teams that I meet throughout my work, whether in Southeast Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, or in Latin America, we have the technical capabilities, we know what we work on, but it's about convincing global clients to work with you while you're a majority Tunisian company. Most of your engineering talent is here. It's not that easy, especially for convincing European clients. How are you able to go beyond that? Oh, you're from Africa, we're not sure we want to work with you.
It's always a challenge. That's the reality. In the early days, literally, like, I use my personal network, and I think this is true for many founders. Your first clients, they're not going to have references about you because you haven't done it before, or the product is new, or maybe there's just an MVP. So it's about personal trust. So that's how you bootstrap in the very early days to get to your first $10,000 or $50,000 if you're lucky of revenue. Beyond that, you need to prove that you have capabilities that are unique. And so to tackle like European and ultimately American clients, we strongly felt at some point we had to set up shop in Europe. So we reincorporated the company in London. We opened an office in Paris, but still the team was majority Tunis based. And it was all about, can we build something for you that nobody else can? And so it's through the angle of innovation that I got, let's say, the first $1 million contract, convincing people one-to-one, CEO to CEO, I could do this. Look, this is what we built so far, but we can build this for you because of this, because of our capability here, and having that personal conviction. Ultimately, I think, like, when you're a founder and you're a CEO, it's you who's going to go and get the deals. It's not going to be the BD team or whatever. This comes much later. On decisive deals, it's literally you. You have to be like convincing. And the best way to be convincing is to be convinced. So if you really believe you can do it and you have the track record and you're a competitive person, my experience is at some point, somewhere, a door will open. Like, never take no for an answer. And maybe out of 20 attempts, 19 will fail, but that's okay, because if you have only one that opens up, then it takes the company to a whole other level. And that's happened to us with our first contracts. And one thing led to another. We kept riding that wave. And as we were scaling revenues, we were also scaling the excellence of the team, the excellence of the innovation research. So this created this flywheel, if you want, that kept growing and growing.
That was on the hardest part of building from Tunisia to the world. What about the surprisingly easiest part? What did you discover that building from Tunisia actually puts me in a better situation than my competitors or peers?
There is one, because if you start in Europe, and this is especially true in those days, it's very hard to assemble a team with very little funding. You need to raise money, but to raise money, you need to have credentials. And so the key advantage being in Tunisia was that I could very quickly with Zahra build a team that was really mission-driven, passionate about it, without having to spend crazy amount of capital. So in a sense, we could assemble a very competent team and have capabilities that were beyond our pay grade in terms of funding. And if you think about it, if you combine excellence in Europe, like technical excellence, visibility with customers, with an ability to scale an elite team between Europe and Africa, but in particular in Tunis, this is actually a huge advantage. It's not that easy to do. Like, I have some founder friends that were asking, like, hey, I'm in New York City, can I create a team in Tunis? And that's going to be all right. I'm like, no, you need one of the founders to be in Tunisia, running the team. You need to be with the team in the trenches, etc., etc. But if you do that, you're creating something that's extremely valuable and that has benefits on both sides. I think one of the magic traits in Tunisia and Africa in general is, like, you can create a very strong trust and human bond with people. The employee number one of the company is still with the company. Employee number two as well. Employee number three as well. It's amazing.
Nice.
Like, we've had an insane ride together. And if it was a European only or US only, the turnover would have been crazy. It would have been a different company, probably less fun.
So let's talk acquisition. How did this whole BioNTech acquisition talk even start? Were you expecting it? Did you had competing acquisition offers? How did you even agree on the price? Can you tell us what happened behind the curtains?
Yeah, this was not the first acquisition offer of InstaDeep. I've had a few prior to that. And every time before, I said no because I really felt going to an acquisition would not really accelerate the mission, or we still had a lot of things to do or prove, or it was too early. And with BioNTech, from day one, biology and AI was a good combo. I can explain briefly why it's the case. If you look at like different use cases of AI, biology is particularly interesting because it's extraordinarily complex. Out of the different sciences, it's the most complex one. So what do I mean by that? If you look at the complexity in a single cell, it's actually higher complexity than understanding the physics of Saturn's rings, for example. And you have 30 trillion cells for one person. So it's an insanely complex problem, a very good use case for AI. This is why you see others like Demis Hassabis, for example, focusing so much on biology. It's essentially like the perfect problem for AI in many ways. So there was this angle that, hey, actually partnering with BioNTech, there is a lot of value to uncover on a fundamental scientific and technical angle, which I've always been passionate about. So that's on the fundamental from first principles. And then it was also working with BioNTech. We started the collaboration in late 2019, got great results on our first project, and then second, and then third. And then they invested in the company during our 100 million Series B. Google invested as well. And so through time, we built a great partnership. I was honestly very inspired by what they did during the pandemic. If there was ever one example of showing the power of deep tech, is what BioNTech and its founder did during the pandemic, because it was actually a small team, extraordinarily focused, that managed to build a vaccine that saved millions of lives, and even probably dozens of millions of lives in record time, making history in so many ways. And by the way, the most successful biopharmaceutical product in history at that time. So that was crazy inspiring. And so I was convinced there's something big there to do.
Maybe you had the choice between raising a Series C or getting acquired.
Yes, we could. But fundamentally, InstaDeep was a project which was a passion project about building AI that benefits everyone. Would we build AI that benefits everyone within biotech? Hell yeah, that was clear. We were already doing it at the time. So I was like, okay, mission fits. And the second aspect, and perhaps people don't realize this, my initial motive and Zohra's to build InstaDeep was to actually prove that young Tunisians, young Africans could innovate and compete at the highest level in deep tech. And so when negotiation came about a potential deal, I kept in my mind, if we actually go ahead and do this deal, this is going to be a watershed moment for the ecosystem. This is going to have such a good positive impact to Tunisia, to Africa. It will inspire the next generation of founders. It will, in a sense, have achieved an extremely important milestone, which was the reason why we started the company. And so, all in all directions were pointing towards, let's do this deal and let's make history to accelerate the different projects.
And on the price, most founders we work with, when they receive an acquisition offer, they always feel undervalued. They're like, no, it's my company, my baby, it's worth way more. This offer is a lowball offer. How did you end up agreeing on a price, and how did you feel that was a fair price?
It's always a long process. Like if people think, hey, this is easy, or it's just a conversation or two, and that's it. No, it's really something that goes through time. And the best way to look at this is it's really a marathon, and you have to keep going during that marathon. You have to keep delivering value. You have to live in two parallel worlds. One world, you're negotiating the deal, you're trying to progress things, and another one where it's business as usual. Let's prove our value to our partners, including to BioNTech. Let's keep going and sort of keep mental stability in a high-stake environment. But I'll tell you this, my thinking is I always try to balance risk and reward. Before being an entrepreneur, I actually worked on risk management. I worked on building risk models. And so very early I felt, if this happens, it's a historic deal. Could InstaDeep become a unicorn? Yes, very probably it could. But this deal was already so transformational. And as you said, this was the largest to this day deal of its kind in tech exit in Africa. This is already extraordinary in so many ways. And this is very difficult as a founder. Like you have a real tension inside you because you have to be extraordinarily driven to be a founder. Life is tough for many years. I became almost personally bankrupt running InstaDeep. For years, I didn't take a salary. Same thing for Zora. It's very, very hard to convince yourself, okay, now is the time to sign this deal, and no, you should not ask for more, or you should not wait for unicorn, etc. And in the end, it was really like the compelling project behind on all the dimensions we discussed that made the difference. I was like, you know what? This project was never about the money. In a funny way, it turned out to be the largest deal ever because we didn't care so much about the money. Don't push it. Don't be too demanding. Don't do the extra step that destroys everything. Just take it. And that's what we did.
Then what happened post-acquisition, both operationally and culturally? And do you ever worry to lose that initial original DNA of InstaDeep?
It's always a worry. It's normal. InstaDeep is not 100% a startup anymore. But one of the great things we do was to keep the two companies operationally independent, with the main reason being to continue to be an elite AI startup, attract top talents, keep that DNA that made us successful. And so the setup we have is a little bit like the setup that Google had with DeepMind until in the end the LLM race forced them to merge Google Brain and DeepMind together. And I think it's a good setup. It will never be the way it was before, and that's normal. And anyway, startups change all the time. It's not like the life form that you had in 2019 or 2020 would stay forever. But we found a good compromise that allowed us to continue to make progress. And as I mentioned, in terms of scientific production, we literally had this year the most productive 6 months ever. It would have been a dream to me, even a few years ago, to say you would make the cover with the InstaDeep team of Nature Machine Intelligence, one of the most reputable scientific journals in machine learning and AI in the world. And we did. So we're really living the dream.
A couple of personal questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
How do you personally stay grounded as your global influence keeps growing? It feels like a lot of responsibility, a lot of spotlight. How is Karim speaking to himself in the mirror in the morning 10 years ago versus 5 years ago versus now?
So my secret weapon is Tunisia, and in particular, southern Tunisia and Tataouine. Every time I come back there, I blend in, find my childhood friends with whom I was playing football when I was like age 5, 10, and they haven't really changed. This is extraordinarily grounding because, yes, it's very easy to get completely swept away in this crazy world of money and deals and stuff. But because I kept that bond, and I actually come back very regularly, not only to Tunis, but to Tataouine. Like people see me like 3-4 times a year, which is a lot given like how much I travel the world and stuff. But it's a conscious effort of mine to keep those values because those values are what gives meaning to things. Otherwise, you will never be happy. No matter what you get, no matter how far you get, there will be like a deep sense of unhappiness about you. And I fight it by just meeting my old friends and actually spending a lot of time in Tunisia. That's what refills me with positive energy.
Sweet. So talking about money, is it true that suddenly receiving a massive amount of money can mess with your brain, can be a real challenge? Some exited successful founders talk even about post-exit depression, and also your extended family members and friends, and even anyone who you meet is trying to ask for some money or something, and it becomes uncomfortable and you close up. Are these things true? And then how do you experience that shift?
Yeah, I mean, it's a life-changing moment, no doubt about it. But in a sense, I'm a bit vaccinated against this because in my personal life and professional life before, I already had that moment. So let me explain. Like when I was age 20, my dad was sick. I was lucky enough or hardworking enough to make it to École Polytechnique. My mom is French, so I was actually receiving a salary from the French state as a student in Polytechnic, which is a huge advantage. But I was actually helping my family back in Tunisia. And so these were tough days. And then in my career in finance for 10 years, I went from literally zero to very successful senior positions. I was a managing director running complex risk products after having designed them and built them, started as an engineer, and then moved on more strategic decision making, etc. And so I had that first phase change. But the funny thing, Ken, and this is where it gets really interesting, and then came back to zero again through InstaDeep. InstaDeep was this crazy contrarian project where I decided in the end to give it my entire focus, my entire energy, and all my available money was just to continue to actually live without a salary, without anything. And so essentially I came back to zero again. And as a consequence, for me, money is really, what's the best way to think about it? Money is concentrated energy. You need to spend a lot of energy to be successful. But if you are, then it's just a tool to do things. One thing it changes, for example, is today I can support many startups in the ecosystem in Tunisia and beyond in machine learning and AI. I can help founders. I can sometimes have like charity initiatives like Project Tatooine, which I'm passionate about, to teach next generation coding skills, AI skills. So yes, it makes a difference in the sense that you can do more. You have more energy to deploy. But I'll tell you something on the personal side. Your friends will remain your friends. And so that's probably a good thing.
And then what does Karim do now? Like, you're still at InstaDeep and BioNTech, which is surprising. 2 years after the exit, usually a lot of exited founders leave right after the lock-in period. But then what's the plan? What does Karim want to do for the rest of his life?
So my goal is to be useful. Literally, that's what I do in the different projects we have in InstaDeep and BioNTech. But in many ways, I'm trying to really help accelerate the development of the ecosystem in Tunisia. So we mentioned investments, but it's a lot more than investment. It's advice, it's me getting involved. And so to give you a sense, during the winter vacation, I felt a strong sense there is something special going on in AI these days. And people look at it through the prism of China versus US competition, like developed countries. And I was like, nobody actually cares about what's going on in the developing world. Nobody cares what's going on in Africa, in Tunisia. And I could see actually things happening there that literally I found nowhere else. So you know what? I decided to go ahead and write this book, Manifesto, which is called Leapfrog, Le Saut Décisif in French. It's now available in Tunisia. It's also available on Amazon. And this is my contribution, like sharing openly those ideas. And so I'm generally focused on positive impact these days. And it can go through my official work, but also through the many other initiatives, including the book, because I actually believe this is an age of abundance, and that's a concept which is still very esoteric in Africa. We're very used to zero-sum games, fights for resources, for reduced opportunity. I am really fighting to bring a culture of abundance to Tunisia and beyond, and I think we can be successful.
You are really, and has always been, Africa optimist. But there's these two stories. The one that tells you the largest young population entering the workforce, growing middle class, even though the data is not clear whether or not it's happening. From a pure macro demographic perspective, over 50 years, the whole Africa is the future. And that makes sense. But if you zoom in more, the Africa skeptics would tell you discretionary income is a tale. Most Africans are living on $3 per day. 30% of their income is spent in food. Whichever service or good you're offering them has to be as critical as food. So it's really hard to make unit economics work for consumer or either on the business side. What do you think the whole global conversation is missing when it comes to AI in Africa and emerging markets? And do you really believe that Africa has a role to play in AI versus just being a pure consumer of it?
Absolutely. I mean, through our example, we're the best example you could think of optimism about tech and AI in Africa. But the question for me was like, does this generalize? Is InstaDeep at the end of the day an outlier? Or could we do this at larger scale for the ecosystem? And this is exactly the thesis I tackle in Leapfrog, the book. And I'll tell you something. I'm optimistic about the future, not just because Africa is full of young talents. We need to educate those talents. And so you need dedicated programs for that, like we're trying to do with Go My Code and Project Tatooine. This is a project we announced last year. We said we would train 10,000 young talents in Tunisia over 3 years in 20 different locations. A year down the road, we're already operational in 8 locations and things are looking good. So that's one example. But beyond that, Africa has exceptional advantages as well. The world, for example, is moving to renewable energy. Why? Not because people are like becoming more environmentally sensitive than before. It's because like solar, wind, and renewable energy is actually more effective than coal, oil, or gas. And this is amazing for a country like Tunisia. It means that the solar potential we have is unmatched. And this is true for Africa. If you look at Africa as a continent, it is by far the continent that has the biggest renewable energy potential. This is important because ultimately AI will scale, and it will be a game of who can deliver the most compute at the most effective price with the cleanest energy. And I think we can be extraordinarily competitive. So that's a message of optimism. Obviously, a lot needs to happen still, notably on the compute side. One of the things we miss when we say, hey, Africa has the future in terms of demographics, is the future is you need young, talented, educated people, extremely important, and we're working on it, but you also need a ton of GPUs. And if you don't have GPUs, you will not be able to compete. But the good news is GPUs in Africa are possible, even though it hasn't happened yet at the scale that's needed. And guess what? Those GPUs could be also extraordinarily cost effective and create a new age of abundance. So in a sense, we still need to get going. I agree with you. The status quo is not a good one, but this doesn't mean that we cannot move and actually leapfrog technologies like happened in the past. Think about how the continent went to mobile smartphones, skipping landlines essentially. I actually think this is possible because of the potential in young talents and energy, renewable energy. And most people do not realize how big this can be. We just have to build it.
Last section of the interview, quick fire. So quick questions,
Yeah.
quick answers. One is, what mistake have you made that you're grateful for?
What mistake? Grateful for.
Or even if you're not grateful for, what mistake have you made?
One mistake I've made is I trusted like a gray hair senior management too much. And there was a point where we wanted to hire head of business development, all that thing, and people coming like in suits and stuff. It didn't work at all. And then I realized actually we had the good secret sauce, which was like very talented people. And so I started really promoting the most promising young engineers who are now have senior positions like our head of research or head of engineering. They all started with the company from very early on rather than trusting experience from outside.
Wow.
So that's a mistake I did once. I'm not going to do it again.
What's the hardest decision you made in the past 5 years?
Hardest decision, I mean, obviously, is to sell the company. That was the highest stake decision, and I took the time to really think it through. Yeah, and I believe it was the right decision. The best decision I took was decide to become an AI company when it was not so obvious. It's insane what's going on.
Is there one founder, preferably not famous, that you admire the most?
One I like a lot is Charles Gorantin, the co-founder and CTO of Alan. Alan is a health tech insurer company in Paris, but it's one of those very few companies that has really productionized AI extraordinarily well.
If you had 100 million to invest in the African tech ecosystem today, how would you allocate it?
I would invest probably something in the order of 20-30% in education and 80-70% in infrastructure. When you think about the digital divide in Africa, it really is about the compute. We are able to train and get our talents to world class. I've seen it at InstaDeep. It's possible. It's not easy, but it's possible. Yet, if you do not have the compute capacity, the fundamental infrastructure to sustain an AI first economy, nothing can happen. You cannot innovate and build next generation models or even deploy those models. AI agents, for example, are absolutely insane. Now we have an IQ that is reaching for the very best AI models 140. That's 99% better than humans. Very recently, we had the first AI models that actually reached gold medal at the International Math Olympiads. And so what is critical is to be able to deploy those AI agents into your startup. And I actually believe that a young, small, agile team in Africa doesn't need to be many people. It can be less than 10 people, and those less than 10 people could actually have the productivity of a classic company of 400, 500 people if they know how to leverage agents. But at the end of the day, you need the infrastructure to build and sustain those capabilities. And what I have learned, the example I've seen in the pandemic, is in the pandemic, it really matters where is the factory producing the vaccines. Because in an emergency, in a crisis, it doesn't matter, hey, if you contracted to ship the vaccine somewhere else, the country where the factory is will always have a preferential advantage. It's the same for GPUs. It's not enough to say, hey, we have access to the cloud and everything will be okay. The reality is there's such a demand for compute these days that you're not sure if you have a large job that you're going to find the GPUs available the way you'd like them to be. So you need to develop the infrastructure in Africa to sustain the next wave of innovation.
Nice. And then last question, what advice would you have for African founders building in deep tech today?
My advice would be you should combine AI with very competitive differentiation and expertise in a given topic. It's not enough. Like I see people, for example, coming with, I have a PhD in machine learning and AI. That's not enough. You need to be genuinely world-class in a given domain expertise, and then you combine it with AI and you just focus on that.
Super. Karim, this was really fun. Thank you for being such an inspiration. I'm looking forward to reading your book, Leapfrog. Thanks again, Karim. This was
It's a pleasure, and it was fun to chat.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank
Kian.
you. Cheers.